My name is Noah Raford. I'm the co-investigator on this project with Alexander and our colleagues Daniel Johnson at KTH and our colleague Wendy Schultz in the UK. I'm very excited to be here with you this morning to share the results of this research, which wasn't just our effort, but was actually the result of the engagement of hundreds of experts around the country, and then later thousands of people, not just in Sweden, but abroad as well. So I'd like to begin by showing a short video that we created at the beginning of the project to help frame our research goals and to get people excited about the topic and participating in the project. So let's begin.
Världens städer förändras. Hur kommer våra städer se ut i framtiden? Särskilt om sättet vi förflyttar oss på förändras. Man frågar sig, finns den bilfria staden? Är den möjlig? Hur skulle den kunna bli verklighet? Många olika faktorer kommer att påverka trafiken och stadslivet under de kommande 50 åren. Kommer Google producera förarlösa bilar? Kommer peak oil inträffa? Kommer människor ens att bry sig om hållbarhet och miljö om 20 år? Vi behöver din hjälp för att ta reda på detta.
So it's quite clear that the world is changing around us, often in very fast and surprising ways, and sometimes in ways that we weren't paying attention to. So one thing which I find surprising, for example, is that today the world's largest transport company is Uber, and they don't own a single vehicle. The world's largest hotel chain and hospitality provider is Airbnb, and they don't own a single hotel room. And the world's largest media company is Facebook, who does not produce a single piece of content. So there's clearly transformational forces at work around us, and the purpose of this project was to explore what futures for Stockholm, particularly in the area of mobility, economy, and society. How are these forces of change going to impact the future of the city, how we move around, where we live, and what we do? And I say this word futures quite deliberately, because what we have done here is create a series of plausible alternative futures, not forecasts. We're not saying that this is the way we think it is going to be. Instead, we're creating a range of possible futures out to the year 2050. So that's 35 years away. Just think about the amount of change that has occurred in Stockholm in the last 35 years, socially, economically, technologically. And we're looking out quite a distance. And of course, there's a great degree of uncertainty the further out you go. There's a whole range of possible outcomes, some of which are under our control, many of which are not, some of which we prefer, some of which we won't, some of which may or may not be more or less probable. So the purpose of these scenarios is to try and inspire thought and provoke discussion about where we want to go and what might happen to us, to try and reveal areas of agreement and disagreement amongst the key stakeholders today, and also to highlight some potential blind spots that we might not have been paying attention to, thereby hopefully reduce the surprise if there are unexpected external shifts. So I want to make one thing clear. I am not an expert on Swedish urbanism. I do have a background in urban planning, but I am primarily a futurist and a strategist. So whilst I'm not an expert, you guys are. And more importantly, not just you, but your friends, peers, colleagues, and families around the country are the people who are not only just making urban policy and transport policy, but living in it, voting for it, imagining how it could be done. So for this research project, instead of doing a traditional scenario planning approach, where we got, say, 15, 20, 30 people together in a room, experts, politicians, and we imagined what is the future with this narrow group of people, we opened this up to a much larger community through a web-based crowdsourcing platform that we created at MIT. This was called Futurescaper, and this is what it looked like here. You can see the video that we showed. And through this platform, we engage over 400 different experts in a wide variety of fields, from transport, from regional, municipal, federal levels, urbanism, architecture, students, citizens, interest groups, real estate developers, a very large group of people, and they contributed 1,000 different answers to this question: what are the most important trends, issues, and ideas that are going to help shape the future of Swedish mobility? It looked a little bit like this. So this is what the Futurescaper platform looks like. Each one of these little bubbles represents a trend or an idea which one or more people suggested was going to be important in helping to shape the future of Stockholm. And you can see how they're connected together by a variety of causal arguments. One person is arguing that this will lead to that, and that will lead to this. These are hypotheses. And what it allowed us to do was to identify the areas that people felt were going to be the most influential and that people agreed upon, the areas that people felt were going to be very influential but were quite uncertain. There was either disagreement over the degree of change or the degree of importance or the impact that it would have once it arrived, or there was just fundamental uncertainty around the topic. So I'd like to share these 4 key drivers of change, as we call that helped shape the scenarios which we're about to share with you. The first is increasing urban population. Everyone felt very, very strongly that under all circumstances in the future, all plausible circumstances in the future, we were going to see an increase in urban population, which was going to produce greater pressure on land and land prices and create more traffic and more congestion. So this was one of the givens which all of the scenarios dealt with. The second one was the increasing use of advanced ICT. This had many flavors, ICT, information communication technologies. Everything from augmented reality glasses and social interaction through the digital sphere, to the deployment of advanced sensor networks in our roadway and urban environments, to automation, robotics, and even quasi-artificial intelligence that might produce things like self-driving vehicles. In fact, we already see self-driving vehicles in a weak form on the road today. So these were the 2 things that people felt were certain about the future. There were 2 fundamental issues which people felt were uncertain, but were going to be very important to impact the future of Stockholm. This was the energy, climate change, global economy nexus, and there was a very clear agreement that these were all interlinked, that to the degree to which cheap energy enabled continued global trade, that the environment allowed for this to occur and wasn't too disruptive with the advanced onset of severe climate change, for example, then we would have a certain set of outcomes. Whereas if we experienced peak oil or an energy crisis or a global financial crisis or severe climate change impacts, that would produce a different set of outcomes. So what was going to happen in the energy, climate, economy nexus was one key uncertainty. The other is social values. Today, Stockholm's a very cosmopolitan, open, welcoming place, quite sophisticated and urbane, but how would the people respond under different conditions if there were a change in the economy, if there was a change in the population demographic, for example? So the combination of these 4 drivers or trends produced the scenarios. So I just want to share what this looks like. On the one hand, we have an axis of uncertainty from a strong energy, economy, environment, climate nexus. In other words, relatively affordable energy, strong global trade, and not too disruptive climate change, down to a weak energy, economy, climate. So disruptive climate change, expensive fuel, decline in global trade, for example. On the other axis, we have social control or social values, from low social control, low sociability, i.e. greater individualism and greater sense for individual freedom, and high social control, so greater solidarity and or greater regulation and enforcement of community values. And the combination of these uncertainties with advancing ICT and increasing urban densities produced the scenarios. So let me just introduce you to the scenarios. The first is what we call free city. This is the result of cheap energy, strong global trade, and not too disruptive climate change, but with low social control, so a greater emphasis on individual freedom and individual choice. The other is called Techno City. Techno City is a globally strong world with lots of trade, cheap or at least greater efficiencies in energy, and not too disruptive climate change, but one of high social control, one of strong sociability, and I'll explain what we mean a little bit more in depth in a moment. The third was Eco-City. So this is the result of, let's say, a severe climate change event or severe peak oil event where energy becomes expensive, resources become more difficult to procure and become more expensive, and the economy on the global scale reverts to a more local level. So this is actually quite a difficult economic environment, but has a high sense of social solidarity and of coming together. Now, you might notice this one. Why didn't we do anything around this? Well, we felt that the experts felt that this was actually quite an implausible outcome. Even historically, when you had a less strong economy in Sweden, you didn't really have a strong sense of individual expression. There was a not individual expression, sorry, of individualism and hedonism. There was a strong sense of community values. So this idea of low social control, low energy, weak energy, no one felt was quite plausible. So we based our scenarios on these 3 outcomes. We then applied these 3 scenarios to three urban environments. This is the outer suburb of Stockholm today, the inner suburb, and then the inner city. So we'd like to show you the results of how these 3 environments might change, and I want to say might because these are suggestions, these are provocations about how these forces might combine into the future to change our city in the future. Let's start with the outer suburb. So this is Free City. This is the outer suburb and Free City. This is a world of cheap energy, of relatively strong global economic integration, and a shift towards the prioritization of individual freedom and individual choice. As a result, more and more people choose to live on the fringe, in the suburban fringe, and you have a high growth rate of sprawl on the fringes around Stockholm. People expect less and get less from the state, and as a result, there's more commuting, more social segregation, and more congestion. Now let's look at Techno City. So as you recall, Techno City is a world of advanced ICT deployment, but strong social integration. So if this is the outer suburbs, this is where, thanks to augmented and virtual realities, high-speed connectivity, smart agents, we have ultra-global integration. So we have integration with the global economy at a scale not seen in any of the other scenarios. There's a very strong emphasis on smart cities and digital technologies, which expresses itself in highly tuned environments, responsive environments that meet most people's needs, but come at the cost of individual, let's say, freedom or privacy. In order for this city to work well in a highly managed, highly efficient digital realm, people give up some of their sense of individual privacy and freedom. Sort of like what we see on Facebook today. You sacrifice a lot of privacy in exchange for a common good. Now, we're in the suburbs here, okay? So there's low privacy and high social control. The government acts as a kind of information exchange to help make the city work better through technology. And this is quite efficient, but produces certain kinds of social and environmental stresses. You may have heard the term the filter bubble, where we retreat into our own digital worlds. We craft our own digital worlds. So this is an interesting potential outcome. The third is the eco-city. So the eco-city is a world of expensive energy. Imagine there's a climate crisis. Imagine you have, say, for example, a significant spike or a sustained spike in the price of fuels, such that we're not able to adapt at a sufficient speed. So we have a weak economy, which shifts us more towards local trade and more local interaction. And this drives, let's say, more extreme social attitudes and positions. So support for a utilitarian state, for a strongly collectivist government that helps make things work in the context of diminished resources, which expresses itself in the suburbs through kind of village-like decoupling of the urban centers. We have low travel, and life is difficult because it's more focused on making things work, but it's in some ways very socially fulfilling because we're working together through a difficult period. Let's explore how these work in the inner suburb. Here's the inner suburb today. Here's the here's the inner suburb under Free Cities. You have the congestion resulting from wealthy people commuting from the suburbs into the city center. You have a lot of social conflict and some higher degrees of social exclusion. You start to see, for example, the rise of high-rise and globalized architecture, perhaps not necessarily in keeping with Stockholm's urban fabric. In Techno City, there's actually not very strong differentiation between the inner suburbs and the outer suburbs. Part of this is because self-driving vehicles are able to reduce travel times significantly. Some studies have shown that you can provide all the transport needs for a city the size of Stockholm with 10% of the cars if those cars are shared in a robotic fashion. Sort of like Uber. If you push a button, a robotic taxi picks you up and takes you where you need to go, and then it picks someone else up, someone else up, someone else up. because they're robotic, they can drive very fast. So you're able to reduce the distances, the effective distances between areas, and the inner city suburb and the outer city suburb become kind of similar. You can do your digital work in either place. It really just becomes a question of choice. The eco-city fringe is interesting in this environment because you still see people are trying to make ends meet, urban gardens and these kinds of things. You notice there's not very many cars here. The cars here are high-efficiency electric vehicles, some public transport, but a lot of people are commuting via bicycle or via other forms of collective travel. Then this becomes more prominent on the inner city, which I'll show you in a moment, which becomes, by necessity, people being forced together to exchange and to make ends meet. So here we are in the inner city. This is what the inner city might look like under Free City. Quite dense, quite active, somewhat of a combination, for example, between New York or Seoul. Very active, then lots of benefit for those who can afford it. You have access to the world's goods, you have access to all sorts of privileges, but there's a high degree of social inequality as well. So if you're not part of that, we expect there to be perhaps greater social conflict, as evidenced by the police car in the left-hand corner. Techno City, the city center, because of the let's call it potentially the despatialization of the economy, the city center no longer becomes the primary place of economic exchange, and it becomes one almost of celebration and enjoyment. Because most economy, most people's lives are exchanged in a digital realm. The city center is no longer the place where we have to come together for work, but a place where we can come together for fun, for choice. So you can imagine there being digitally augmented flash mobs, all sorts of spontaneous concerts and events there. Because this is a real-time city, you can have a very fluid and interactive environment. But it looks quite different in the eco-city environment. People are forced to come together through exchange. You could imagine the very dense population, very dense living quarters, lots of immigration, and a very tense relationship between insider and outsiders, because ultimately we're doing our best for our people, but there's a lot of people who are in need. So each of these has significant trade-offs and opportunities. I want to be very clear that we, nor any of the experts participating in this, felt that one was better than the other. Right? These are the outcomes of individual choice, of social choice, and of global external factors, and they have pros and cons for each. But what I would like to ask you now is, given that the future is the result of both our actions and the external forces in the world, which would you prefer? Which would you like to live in? Or where would you like to see your children or your grandchildren living? So let's have a quick vote. Raise your hand if you would like to live in a world of free cities. Okay, we have 3 people. Don't be shy. Yeah? 3 people? Any more? Okay, 3 people. Bravery. Oh, sorry. Techno City. Raise your hand if Techno City is an inspiring vision. I would guess about slightly over half, lots in the top. How about Eco City? Right? Maybe slightly under half. Maybe significantly under half, actually. Quite interesting. So we asked this question in the largest national newspaper, in the largest national newspaper, to over 3,000 people to vote on the ones they thought were most interesting or attractive. And the results were actually not too dissimilar to what you guys felt. Free City had the lowest number of votes. Techno City and Eco City were almost parallel, but you can see here 1,465 versus 1,433 in favor of Techno City. I don't know if that's a majority, I'm not quite sure. But I think the point is this raises very interesting questions for what we do today if these are possible worlds for Stockholm. We're not saying these are forecasts. We're not saying that we believe one of these 3 will occur. But based on the research of these 400 experts from around the country, this seems to be a quite plausible picture of how the future could unfold through a combination of social forces, economic forces, environmental forces, and others. So thank you very much. We're excited to share this with you, and we look forward to the rest of the day.